Mac Football Forever. I'm Alex. That's Caleb. Caleb, how you doing, man?
I mean, I'm pretty great. I mean, how could you not with guns like these? Uh, uh. You know, it only took like 10 seconds for that to happen on camera.
Do you hear that? That's the
Yeah.
sound of the FBI
What?
not knocking at your door because nobody's threatened. So we are going to talk about just the state of the MAC teams. We're going to call this the State of the MACtion series. We're going to go team by team with these episodes and kind of just give a brief overview of where these teams are at and kind of give you a snapshot in time of where we feel these programs are at in January of 2021. For total disclaimer, because like news moves so quickly, we're recording this episode of Toledo, the next episode of Ohio, both tonight on Wednesday, the 13th of January. So if we get anything wrong, that's the timestamp. So that's why things are going to change drastically after we record this, and I'm going to feel bad.
What are they gonna do?
Yeah, what are you going to do?
What are they gonna do?
Toledo is one of the more underachieving teams. Is probably like the most honest way I can put it. Can you put that in different words for me, though, Caleb?
If you really wanted to hear my perspective on how underachieving Toledo's been over the years, you could go back and listen to really almost any episode in the second half of the season last year from our game week reviews. But yeah, I mean, with the amount of talent that Toledo reels in every year, the prediction is always there that they're gonna go to Detroit, or they're gonna be the favorite for the West, or at least if they're not the favorite, they're probably the second best team, and they just keep not doing it. Like, yes, they've won a MAC championship. The odds will work out in your favor at some point if you have that much talent on your roster year after year, but they keep having letdowns in some way or another, and that'll be a good chunk of what we talk about today. But plenty of other stuff. Talk about what this year looked like and what they have to look forward to in 2021.
So we kind of have things broken up. With each team, we're just going to go through. We're going to have like 5 topics each. That was kind of a teaser topic, but it's also the first topic that we're going to go on. The first topic we're going to have for Toledo is just how much Toledo is underachieved. Every year they're always picked, first or second to win the MAC, and it's respectable. They've recruited at a high level. They've played really well. They've been in the higher competition in the West, especially in like the NIU. You're like everybody covering NIU and Toledo and all those teams. They know what Toledo's been through, and they know why they're good. Over the past couple of years, they're still picked high after the 2017 championship, even though they haven't proven anything to show that they're championship worthy still. If anything, they've clearly shown areas where they drop off, but people still buy into Toledo. People still buy into Toledo. And I guess that's kind of it. Why do you think people keep picking Toledo to either win the West or come very, very close to doing that, even though they keep falling on their face?
I think the coaches in the league have a lot of respect for the type of talent. They look at film and they see what those guys are capable of. They see what Toledo looks like at the top of its game. I mean, Toledo can go and hang 40 on anybody any given day and not break a sweat, it seems like. But I think it seems like every year they're in that position. They're always a team that is going to establish the run. They tend to have a good quarterback most years, and no matter what happens, they're productive. That never changes. Toledo's not in the last decade. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Maybe, and I'll find out that I'm not correct. There's no chance they've been in the bottom half of the MAC in offensive, like total offense, and certainly not on like in the bottom half in passing or rushing. I would have to think, because they're just productive every year. They have outstanding skill players. They have an outstanding quarterback. They have a system in place that works for them that picks up yards and chunks. Inevitably, they let down in some way, but I think that people see how they always have the playmakers to just win big, and that's why the coaches and the players always are like, well, they look better on paper than anybody else. On film, they look better than anybody else. It's just a matter of when they things fall through the cracks that they take a big loss or two, or things tumble down the stretch.
And some of the big names that we've seen come up over 2018, 2019, and 2020, most especially. And I should note right now that, we're kind of jumping around with topics here, but a lot of these guys that I'm about to list off, I don't think Toledo's going to be losing any of these players. I've been trying to find like, is anybody coming back? Is anybody leaving? There hasn't been like a major announcement like there was at Ball State, as much as with all these other teams. The most I found is, Dave Briggs for the Blades saying that a lot of these guys should be back, but didn't list off too many names. But I digress. Eli Peters, he was a quarterback that came in and battled his way in. And, I kind of thought that we saw the peak of him in 2019 and wasn't expecting much in 2020. I
Right.
think he kind of elevated his game, though. Do you agree or disagree there?
Yeah, 100%. I think we were both on the same page that we did not think that like Carter Bradley or that we wouldn't see Eli Peters elevate his game much farther than what he had already accomplished, and that Carter Bradley in all likelihood had a higher ceiling. Carter Bradley might still have a higher ceiling, but Eli Peters was like outstandingly efficient and looked so good in some early games in the season, especially. The Western Michigan game, I still look at it and I'm like, Eli Peters did not deserve to lose that game, but Eli Peters isn't a full team. So he exceeded pretty much everything I expected this year. It's a shame that the Toledo quarterbacks continue to suffer from injuries.
In that quarterback spot, it's super good every year, or at least it's really talented every year because Toledo continues to recruit its ass off. And I guess this is how I'm going to bridge myself into the second topic, is that it's still recruiting its ass off. It's still, recruiting better than Western, better than Miami, better than NIU. And I want to say a lot of the MAC teams, especially in 2020, on paper, it looks like recruiting has just gone up. I don't know if that's a product of just better talent out there or what, but the classes, in 2020, they look a lot better than classes in the past. That's still true for Toledo, who was already setting itself at a high, expectation for recruiting talent and is still kind of exceeding that own expectation. Toledo does a good job of recruiting not only in state, but in Florida, where it gets a good amount of its recruits.
Yeah.
Eli Peters, Carter Bradley. We got a transfer quarterback coming in, Tucker Gleason, that we'll hit on in a little bit. DeQuan Finn, he's a Michigan product, Detroit kid, but still it's a loaded quarterback room. And we can say a lot about other position groups, but let's focus on recruiting at quarterbacks too. They have a lot of competition with Eli Peters and Carter Bradley. And if Carter Bradley wasn't so good, then Eli Peters wouldn't have completed, 68% of his passes in 2020. You know what I mean? Like he had to compete at that level to have his sort of job. Through your perspective, and you don't focus too much on recruiting, Caleb, but you do know that Toledo does a better job of recruiting or just having better talent 1 to 85 on its roster than it does most other teams.
Mm-hmm.
How much does that play into your head whenever you think about how good a roster is?
I don't look at Toledo usually and think, oh man, they're gonna really struggle in the linebacking course this year, or oh man, they're really gonna have no wideouts this year. When it comes to position groups, there aren't a lot of spots I look at for Toledo defensively and go, like, oh man, they're outstanding on the defensive line, but they're always good. They always have depth. They have guys that quietly do their jobs. Like, yeah, Toledo has struggled defensively in some big games, but like talent-wise is there. Results-wise, it's mostly there. It's so hard to. I'm sure somebody who's watched Toledo every game for the last few years is gonna have a better answer than I would, but it still blows my mind that they're so consistent at so many spots and then downright great at spots that they still find ways to lose. And I know them in that scenario, that formula, you look at it and you go, it's coaching. Maybe it is, but it's also coaching that's put them in the spot of, winning 66% of their games seemingly every year and always being in the position to compete for a MAC West title. So there's so much success in the recruiting angle of it. They never drop off. And I think that's the biggest sell for what recruiting does for Toledo is you never expect Toledo to have a losing season. When was the last time you went into a season and thought, Toledo's probably not going to be top 3 in the West?
Well, I could actually tell you that, but we're not going to get into the memes of the internet from MACtion past. I guess it is like when people say like, oh, don't pick the logo on your helmet. But with Toledo, you kind of do because like it does have the street cred of maybe it hasn't always gotten the job done September through December, but Toledo's doing a good job of getting the job done in the off season, in on the recruiting trail. It does a great job of that. To an extent, it does matter. And, they guess in simpler words, they recruit their way into a bowl game every year, right?
Sure, that's fair. And I mean, they've always got top end talent. At the end of the year, we're always talking about a Toledo guy at a skill position that's one of the best offensive players in the MAC. That never fails. And they've always got a couple guys who are producing in a big way. Part of it's the system, part of it's the talent. But even if the system was faulty, they'd still have upper echelon MAC level talent. So a lot of guys that could play for, get major time for maybe like an AAC school or a Power Five school. So, I mean, it's not to say that you shouldn't be playing at Toledo if you're a great player, but Toledo sure does get players who could even, I think we'll see it in the coming years, maybe transfer out and play their last year, grad transfer or whatever, at a bigger school. Part of me does wonder if we still could see that from some of the guys on Toledo's roster this year after the letdown in the second half of the season. But that's the story for for when if it actually happens, not speculating.
And we can kind of talk about some of those transfers, not so much the out, but in looking into 2021, and at least today, it looks like the big news in the transfer portal as far as Toledo's concerned. Tucker Gleason, a quarterback who was at Georgia Tech for a couple months, he's coming to Toledo with 4 years left. His high school teammate Judge Culpepper, a defensive lineman who used to play tight end too, really nice hands out there from Penn State. Like I said, defensive lineman, though. He's coming to Toledo with about 3 years left, I believe. And Ronald Delancey, Miami Northwestern high school guy, he's transferring in from Nebraska to cover the safety position for Toledo. And again, Toledo's a program where it does bring in recruits every once in a while through the transfer portal, and it seems like they tend to get, it's like a lineman or two every year, and they kind of benefit there. But the one name I want to look at, and we keep going to quarterbacks because it's just so important and it's so good. And it feels like once Toledo just like has it actually figured out at quarterback, then like a 10-win season is just right there in front of them at any point. Tucker Gleason, I don't know if he'll outperform Eli Peters, DeQuan Finn, Carter Bradley when he gets to campus. But man, he is a really good prospect, and Toledo is very lucky to have him. Have you seen any film on him yet?
I haven't, and probably will go watch after this. But
very easy. The ball just comes out his hand very easy and hard and immediate and deep throws. It's really impressive.
Yeah, and I know that I know it could depend on a couple guys, but I mean there are guys like Bryce Harris who are back for Toledo up front, and the offensive line should be consistent and good as always. I mean that's a first team all MAC returner on the offensive side of the ball. And I mean, they've got a couple other guys that have just been like plugged into that offense for several years now that are probably coming back again. So wideouts, obviously, I feel like Toledo usually has more wideouts that are succeeding in a big way that go after their most productive season. But there's actually a couple guys like that should be back next year for them at wide receiver after having a pretty dang good year for the limited amount of games they played.
And I kind of brought up the point earlier. We'll speed this along. And the next point I did want to bring up is that it doesn't look like Toledo's really losing anybody. So if Toledo's just kind of like hoarding all this talent right now, the way a lot of MAC programs at all really want to do, Toledo's going to be in a very good spot moving forward. But who are some of like your favorite returning players, heading into 2021? I'm just going to say Deontay Johnson, the defensive end linebacker.
So, gosh, I have to think about this because as far as guys who are still, I mean, everybody's can eligibility wise could come back. Harris is obviously a guy that could come back and anchor the offensive line. Between receivers like McKinley Lewis and Winstead, I'm looking, those guys can be difference makers, but they've also got guys who tend to rocket up the charts at the wide receiver spot out of nowhere. That happens every once in a while with Toledo. I don't know about Samuel Womack at cornerback.
Yeah,
he graded out pretty decently.
He's gonna be going back, yeah.
Yeah, and so he graded up pretty well in a lot of ways for them this year. Defended a lot of passes, got his hands on a lot, and so they've got some kind of underrated defensive backs too, I think, in that respect. So those are just a few of the guys that I think are going to come back in a big way for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And Shaquille Seymour, he's the one that I have to look out for too.
Yeah,
He was a running back that's been around for a long time. Remember Terry Swanson? He used to be his backup.
that's weird.
Yeah, that's a
That's
name.
amazing. It's
Yeah. How old do
the
you feel?
the Mac is stupid about like you hear a name from 5 years ago and you go, "Wow, I'm old," just because it seems so far removed from that time.
Last thing we're just going to talk about, just some open thoughts about Jason Candle. You know, he was again looking back to 2017 when all looked right in the world for Toledo, and just playing so average as it has been. It just seemed like it was not really a possibility with how they were just rocking in 2017. And it just seemed like that was also the year where Jason Candle could have hopped off, and I believe UCF was an open job at the time. USF could have been a possibility for him. But still, he stuck around in Toledo, and he's still there. I know Toledo fans, I'm just going to say, have mixed thoughts about the way this coaching staff has performed. And he's the guy on the cover, so got to put Jason Candle up front. You know, I don't know where's your head at with this coaching staff, and where does this team, need to say like, no, this is good, or where does this team need to say this needs to improve?
I mean, I imagine they've already had this conversation about like what do we need to do to capitalize on how much potential we have, and so I'm not going to say that they need to have this conversation that I'm sure they've had, but I feel like Toledo's probably got to be in a state of constant reevaluation just because of they don't meet their own expectations. They don't meet the
Mhm.
expectations other people have for them. If everybody has these really high expectations for you and you have these high expectations for yourself, and more often than not you don't meet those expectations, that should require a lot of like intrinsic internal thinking. And if you're evaluating about whether the things you're doing are right, whether they're sustainable, is there something you're missing? And again, it's not to say that they haven't had these thoughts or these conversations, but maybe they bring in like maybe this offseason spent talking to different coaches about what they do in their system, how they operate as a program, and what takes them to a consistent championship team. Because we already have a lot of proof that they're winners. Toledo has been winners, but the difference between that and getting to Detroit 2 out of 3 years every year with the talent they have, they're completely capable of that. And I think that's the case as long as they make, if say Candle leaves in a year or two, if they hire right, Toledo should still be in that place because of how they've recruited. They're not going to have a cupboards bare recruiting class while Candle's there. So I think that they have to internally evaluate where they're at, what they can change to consistently peak.
Yeah, they definitely do need to change something up because they sort of mastered the spread offense for a little bit when teams were still kind of balancing how much they wanted to spread and go shotgun, and when shotgun was still like a thing where you had to go out of your way to say that we're doing, you know what I mean? And while more teams were trying to catch up to that sort of speed, Toledo was just bypassing them. Now that more teams are kind of catching up to that same speed and playing at that same speed and recruiting at that same speed, Toledo's just kind of like, hey, everyone's about as fast as us now. So they do need to change something up. I kind of liked, and one team that did a good job of evaluating and reevaluating where it was even after a championship run, Buffalo. Toledo,
Yeah.
I'd like to see if it sold out in any capacity to run the ball more into, you know, getting, it's obviously wanted the ball in Bryant Kovacs' hands a ton last year, probably more so than its
Yes.
wide receivers, which is fine. But maybe the way they were going about it wasn't the right way of doing it. And if they keep getting good talent at that position, Micah Kelly's coming up. He's looking good. They've got another kid
Mm-hmm.
that's coming through and running backs. I'm blanking on his name, Virginia native. Toledo Blade wrote about him. That's the only reason I'm thinking about him. Um, but if they can find different and inventive ways to get balls into the hands of the guys that they want to, that's going to be a difference maker. We said they're recruiting their way into a bowl season, but can they coach their way, into a 10-win season after that?
Yeah, I think if this is another year where we see what we've seen in years past in terms of underperforming to expectations, then even in a winning season, I think you have to evaluate if you got to make a change. I don't know off the top of my head what Candle's contract situation looks like, but I'm not going to advocate firing for him because they're too good. But
Right.
it's just you still have to think about whether something has to change at the top, or something fundamentally has to change in order to achieve what you're capable of.
Absolutely. I'm with you there. Caleb, I think that wraps it up for us on our first episode for the State of the MACtion series. Do you have any lingering thoughts on Toledo before we head out of here and move on to the next team?
No, just Toledo is going to be another team that I think next year maybe people finally think, okay, Western Ball State probably better than Toledo next year. So watch Toledo figure it out and go to Detroit. Like, wouldn't surprise me at all.